What happens when the harvest moon stops being a warm golden lantern and becomes a cold spotlight that pins you in the middle of an ocean of rattling stalks? You've probably stood at the edge of a field in late September, smelling the dry silk and hearing the papery whisper of leaves, thinking there's something almost holy about that light until you realize something else thinks the same thing. And it's already mapped your scent trail from the combine to the back porch. The 3 stories you're about to hear didn't happen in a movie. They unfolded under the swollen, low-hanging super harvest moon of 2026. When shadows stretched like tar and the fields breathed in a way that made lifelong farmers lock their doors, these are the testimonies of ordinary Americans who walked into the tall grass expecting solitude and came sprinting out with the absolute certainty that the harvest was never empty. My name is Landry Tate. I'm a farm equipment mechanic out of Hastings, Nebraska. And I've never been one to jump at crickets. I've slept in barns, walked machinery rows at 2 in the morning, done, and even camped in the back 40 as a bet. But nothing laid a cold hand on my spine like the night of September 28th. When the harvest moon sat so fat and orange on the horizon, it looked like a watching eye. I'd gone out to the old Sutterfield parcel to pick up a hydraulic cylinder I'd left near the drainage ditch. A quarter-mile trek through corn that had been left standing after the neighbor's combine threw a belt. The stalks were tall, 11 feet easy, their leaves crisp and tan. And the moon was so bright I didn't even bring my flashlight. Just stuffed my hands in my hoodie pocket and walked the tractor path with that crunching rhythm you get used to. About 200 yards in, the wind dropped to nothing, the kind of sudden stillness that makes your ears ring, and that's when I heard my own footsteps. But they weren't mine anymore. There was a second set of crunches, about 15 feet behind me, matching my gait exactly, pause for pause, and when I stopped, the echo kept going for just a single extra step before stopping so abruptly it felt like the entire field was holding its breath. I remember whispering, "You're just hearing a deer, but deer don't place their weight with such deliberate, heavy intention, and deer don't mimic the sound of rubber soles on packed dirt." I started walking faster. And the thing behind me matched my speed with an accuracy that made my stomach drop because it wasn't just following. It was learning my stride in real time, adjusting to my little half-stumble on a route so perfectly that the duplicate steps sounded like a recording played back a split second late. I broke into a jog, and behind me the footfalls became a loping, wet-sounding thud that no longer pretended to be human, like something heavy was shifting from 2 legs to something else. And the dry corn stalks to my left started swishing violently in a straight line parallel to my path, while nothing touched the stalks on my right, which told me the thing was right there, pacing me just beyond the first row, hidden by the moon-cast lattice of shadows that seemed to lean toward me. Can't explain what came over me, but I twisted my head while still running, and for one frozen. Framed the moon backlit a shape that made no sense taller than the corn. A gathered-up darkness with a spine that bent forward like a question mark, and the face, if you can call it a face, was a glossy, chitin-like surface, reflecting the moon as a perfect, inverted crescent. And it was looking down at me with a stillness that felt like hunger was a patient thing, an ancient thing that had been waiting seasons to find someone alone. I didn't look again. I pumped my arms and crashed through the last 30 yards of the field until I burst onto the gravel lane. Lungs burning, and when I finally bent over to catch my breath and glanced back, the corn was perfectly still, the moon as peaceful as a postcard. But there at the edge where I'd exited, every single stalk in a neat semicircle had been pressed flat toward me like something had knelt down and inhaled my scent right where I'd left the field. I don't walk the Sutterfield acreage after sunset anymore. I've since put trail cams there. They never capture anything, but every morning that patch of flattened corn has widened. And I swear, the flattened stalks spell out a shape I only recognize when I see it from the highway. A long, bent shadow with too many joints. Geneva Pruitt here. I'm a third-grade teacher in Findlay, Ohio, before September 27th of 2026. I used to love the way the harvest moon turned the soybean and cornfields around our farmette into a silver and amber painting. A quiet place where I'd unwind after grading papers by walking the fence line with a thermos of chamomile tea. That evening, the super harvest moon rose so huge and pinkish gold that my husband, Dwayne, and I took a dozen photos from the driveway. Then Dwayne went inside to watch the Bengals game, and I decided to walk the long way around the property, tracing the perimeter where our land kisses the Watterson family's standing corn. The air smelled of drying husk and that mineral temps of early autumn dust. And I was about halfway along the east side when I became aware of a soft, rhythmic hissing sound, like someone slowly exhaling through their teeth. And it was coming from inside the corn about 2 rows deep, right alongside me. I stopped walking, figuring it was a raccoon or maybe a feral cat warning me off. And I clapped my hands twice and called out, "Go on, Git." But the hissing didn't stop, just shifted lower in pitch, becoming a long, drawn-out whisper that sounded almost like it was trying to shape words. My own name suddenly floated out of the rustling in a voice that was parched and wrong. Geneva dragged out with a dry leaf crackle that made the hairs on my arms stand. Straight up because there was no human mouth behind it, just the sound of husks being forced apart and scraped together. I backed away, whispering a prayer. And that's when I noticed the moonlight was behaving strangely. It was pooling in the gaps, between the rows like liquid mercury, and the shadows weren't just dark. They were actively moving, coiling around the stalks in ways that defied the fixed position of the moon. Like something in there was breathing light in and out of a lung made of spider silk and soil. I told myself it was a prank, maybe the Watterson boys messing with me. But then the whisper came again. This time 2 voices layered, a high dry rattle and a wet lower groan. And they said, "Bring him out," and I realized they weren't speaking to me. They were discussing me. And the scent of turned earth and old molasses suddenly thickened until I gagged, and a procession of 3 tall, gaunt shadows stepped out of the corn in perfect unison. Their outlines so stretched and thin, they seemed to be walking on stilts made of compressed night. And they moved not like people, but like praying mantises, with that slow, deliberate reach and freeze. Except they were facing me with faces that were just smooth planes of dried corn silk intricately woven into the shape of a staring mask. I screamed and ran, and behind me the field erupted with a sound I'll never forget. Thousands of stalks thrashing as though a combine had come alive and was chasing me. The ground vibrating with a deep, thudding pattern that felt like a heartbeat transmitted through the soil. And just as I reached the back porch, I dared one glance over my shoulder and saw the 3 figures standing perfectly still at the tree line. Moonlit silk masks reflecting nothing, no eyes, no mouths. Just that awful patient tilt of the head, and one of them slowly raised an arm that unhinged into multiple jointed segments and pointed directly at the kitchen window where Dwayne sat watching television. I burst inside, locked the door, and collapsed. But when Dwayne came to comfort me, he looked at the window and went pale. Something had pressed a perfect, moist handprint onto the glass from the outside. But the hand had 6 fingers, and the palm was ribbed like the underside of a corn leaf, and the print slowly dissolved into a sweet, rotten sap that dripped down onto the sill and still stains it to this day. We sold the farmette by Halloween, and I can't drive past a cornfield in September without my eyes scanning the stalks for that smooth mask of woven silk. Because I know now they only need one witness to tell the story, and I was theirs. Cordell Haskins. I hail from a little spot called Stafford County, Kansas. And I'd farmed wheat and milo my whole adult life until my cousin Roscoe convinced me to put in 60 acres of sorghum for silage, and come September of 2026, when the super harvest moon sat up there like a big old torch, we were erasing the weather to get it cut before the stalks got too dry and brittle. On the night of September 29th, after the hired hands had gone home, I stayed out with the swather. Crawling across the field at 3 miles an hour, the headlights cutting a yellow tunnel through the dark, and the moon washing everything else in that eerie, shadow-free daylight that feels like you're living inside a black and white photograph. I was on my third pass when the cab radio started popping with static, and then a voice came through, not over the speakers, but from somewhere inside the machine, a low, gravelly murmur that said, "You're cutting our hair, Cordell. You think you can just cut our hair and drive away?" I killed the engine and sat there, gripping the steering wheel, listening to the night settle, and that's when I saw them. At the far edge of the uncut sorghum, a line of figures all holding hands, their silhouettes weirdly elongated and thin as fence posts. And they were swaying together like a congregation singing a hymn I couldn't hear. I wanted to back the swather up and bolt, but the ignition clicked and wouldn't turn over. The figure started walking toward me, still holding hands, their legs bending backward at the knee like a bird's. And the moonlight glinted off something on their heads, not hair, but dense clusters of sorghum seed heads that had fused with their scalps, rustling as they moved and shedding a fine red dust that drifted across the field like a warning fog. The scent that came with them was the worst part. A mix of fermenting grain, copper, and the cloying sweetness of silage gone wrong. And the lead figure, the tallest one with a head crowned by a massive, dangling panicle of seeds that completely obscured its face, parted the sorghum in front of my swather with a slow, deliberate sweep of its arm, revealing a mouth that wasn't on a face but in the center of its chest. A vertical, seemed opening that pulsed and rasped, "You've taken enough. Now you feed the reaper's children." I came unglued and kicked the door open, hitting the ground running in the direction of the farmhouse. But the sorghum rows seemed to close behind me, lashing like a live thing, and I could hear those backward-jointed legs popping as the figures chased me, not with speed but with a horrifying inevitability. Their joined hands never breaking, creating a fence of limbs that was slowly encircling the entire field. I made it to the yard, looked back, and the entire sorghum acreage was moving, every stalk bending in. Concentric waves toward the center where the swather sat dead, and rising from the middle of the field was a huge, spiraling column of red dust and chaff that took the rough shape of a hunched-over figure cradling the swather in its chest mouth like a toy. By morning, the swather was found tipped on its side, the cutter bar snapped clean off and arranged into the shape of an eye, and all around the machine, pressed into the dirt, were footprints that started human-like, but gradually elongated until they became nothing but deep, narrow slits, as if the things had simply plowed themselves back into the soil. I took a bulldozer to that sorghum the next week and never planted anything taller than knee-high again. But every harvest season since, when the moon swells and turns orange, I wake up at 3 a.m. tasting red dust and hearing that chest-mouth voice humming a tune that sounds exactly like the rhythm of a swather chewing through stalks. And I know the reaper's children are still waiting for me to finish the harvest I never should have started.